Welcome to EEM-166, Commercial and Industrial Wiring. This is Module 3, Conduit Bending, a lab voiceover by Jeremy Morse. All images can be found at Wikimedia Commons underneath that title that you're seeing right here. And all of the images are also free under the Creative Commons copyright. So this week we're doing some conduit bending, and some of the examples and reasons we have to bend conduit is because conduit is attached to the bulkhead or attached to surfaces, and the holes that we have to get the conduit to match up with are typically raised. So the conduit has to be bent. On the left here, this is an offset. This is one of the more typical bends that have to be done simply because every single box and every connection has to have an offset. And this is where it's raised up off, the conduit's raised up off of the bulkhead in order to get into a particular hole on a workpiece. In this middle case, the conduit has to be raised in order to make the coupling connection. And on this last example, we can see conduit that there's two offsets here or a 3-point saddle bend because there's really not a flat area in the center. So it comes from one work box, is bent down to be anchored to the wall, and then comes directly back up. So this could be considered a 3-point saddle bend, although we don't have a whole lot of an obstacle to work around in this case. So the lab example used this display board, and what I wanted to do was make an example that was a little more difficult than what you might find in a standard example, so that more difficult situations could be observed. In this particular case, we wanted to come from the main panel, and just to make it difficult, go underneath the motor and then back into the service disconnect. What makes this difficult is because the guide that you see above only discusses how to make these bends, these 90-degree bends in the take-up from the end point. You subtract your take-up from the overall distance coming up, and that's where you start your bend. But it doesn't discuss what to do when you have something in the center that you have to subtract from. In that case, you have to find out the total linear inches that are consumed during each of these bends and in between in order so that you can see how long your pipe is going to have to be. To do that, we needed to take some measurements, and we just used a rough sketch in order to make these measurements. We found that the panel to the disconnect was 23 inches. Our first drop was 10 inches, and then back up to the disconnect was 6 3/4 inches. So we had to figure out the total length of pipe to go along this path back up to the disconnect. Not just for each bend, we did need that too, but for the overall length of pipe, how much pipe were we going to need? So what we figured out, we did a little bit of a brainstorming session and figured out that we had the radius, because that's 5 inches. That's our take-up, it's given. And if we look at our radius as being 1/4 of a circle, or if we look at our bend as 1/4 of a circle with a given radius, then we can get the circumference of the circle and divide by 4, which is what we did. And we found that the total linear distance of conduit per bend is 7.85 inches. So we filled out our chart to see how much conduit and where our lines were going to be for each bend. Our first offset here would go to 2.375 inches. That's 2 inches for the offset, and then 3/8 of an inch for the total shrinkage on that. The second, which would be our first 90-degree bend, the second is our take-up, which would be this distance here, is 5 inches, but our linear number is 7.85 inches. So at this point, when we're done right here, when we're done with our second bend, we've used 10.225 inches of conduit. And that takes us directly into our second bend here, which again we use another 7.85 inches with 5 inches of take up. And so that brings us to 18.075, or basically 18 inches of conduit that's now been used, but we've only crossed 12.37 inches. So we're only 12.37 inches off the panel. And then we get to our straightaway. Now we figured the straightaway up because we took all of our take-up numbers and then subtracted that from 23. So we have 2.375 plus 5 plus 5 plus another 5, so 15 plus 2.785, so 23 minus 17.375, which gave us a total of 5.625 inches. So roughly 5.5 inches is our space in between before we start into bend number 3. So, and then bend number 3 takes up an additional 7.85 inches right here. And our finals to get into the box was we added 1.125 inches for a total of 32.675 as the total length that we were going to need for this entire job. Incidentally, 1.125 inches is not long enough to be able to make that bend, and the end result was that we needed to move the disconnect up another 4 inches. We needed 6 inches total to be able to make that particular run. It was a good learning experience for us to get in there and try to let the students bend an offset that is only 1.12 inches in depth. And so here we have where we laid out our conduit, and because conduit is one straight line, and marked it and put it on the floor and practiced bending this shape. And you can see right here on the right when we had our finished shape, you see we had to have this excess in order to bend that we don't actually start until right here. That's where we have to cut it off to get to the panel. And you can see this right here, this bend was mathematically we had it only taking up 1.12 inches, and you can see that it needed considerably more than that in order to get out to space. So when you're doing these bends, these calculations, you may have to think outside the box a little bit in order to determine what you're going to need to do. But the charts that accompany this text are your base reference for it, and use those, and with some of the knowledge that you've picked up in the trade, and you should be able to make some really nice, really nifty conduit bends. Instructors, please modify this lab as you need to accommodate for time and the materials, so that you may just have a lab where it's simply some 90-degree stub-ups or some offsets, maybe 3-point saddle bends. That's completely up to your discretion. This has been Module 3 Conduit Bending. Hope you enjoyed it. Good day.